So, um, how do you know when something is morally wrong?
That is quite the question to just drop right at the top.
Right. But I mean, really think about it. And I'm talking to you, the listener here. I don't mean like a minor social faux pas, like cutting in line at the grocery store.
Sure.
I mean something fundamentally just irrevocably wrong.
Most of us, if pressed, would probably point to some kind of inherited architecture, I guess.
Exactly. Like a religious text handed down through generations or a set of constitutional laws.
Or maybe just the collective cultural norms that, like, our parents just drilled into our heads from day one.
Yeah, we tend to view ethics as this sort of ladder, something built from the top down.
With divine or state authority just sitting right up there at the apex.
Right. But what if we've been looking in the completely wrong direction this entire time? What if the actual root of right and wrong isn't um, etched into stone tablets or legal documents?
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. What if it's buried incredibly deep within our own, like, cellular biology?
It really is a disorienting question to sit with, to be honest.
It is.
Yeah.
Or, taking it even further, what if morality behaves less like that rigid ladder we were just talking about and more like the chaotic, horizontal, entangled root system of a forest floor?
Yeah, because when you strip away that comforting scaffolding of rules we've built up over, thousands of years, the architecture of ethics starts to look much more organic,
Becomes messy.
very messy, volatile, and deeply, deeply embedded in our physical reality.
And that shift in perspective, it really changes how we judge almost every action we take, which is the core of our exploration today.
Yeah, we are getting into some heavy territory.
We really are. We're doing a deep dive into a collection of ideas grouped together as the ethics of Canon 1.
And we have three very distinct philosophical frameworks on the table today.
Distinct is almost an understatement. I mean, they come from wildly different corners of the intellectual universe.
They really do.
First, we have this casual, like, internet slang-filled text message log between two people debating cavemen.
Which is such a funny format for philosophy.
It's amazing. Then we have a dense, highly academic metaphysical essay that just completely challenges the utopian promises of Silicon Valley.
Right, taking on the tech bros.
Exactly. And finally, we have this really provocative dive into network theory that introduces concepts so extreme they honestly border on terrifying.
The formats just couldn't be more disparate. I mean, you're moving from crying emojis in a chat app to, citations of ancient Greek epistemology.
But there's a thread, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Running through all of them is this aggressive, almost surgical attempt to deconstruct human behavior.
They're all trying to answer the exact same underlying problem.
Right. How do we survive, and what does it actually mean to be ethical in a world where those traditional top-down absolutes have either, completely collapsed or just being replaced by technology?
So let's start with that text log, because the origin of this first theory, which is called hungerism, is just completely surreal to me.
It's a great starting point.
It's this conversation between two individuals who go by Cahell and 8 Girl. And the transcript just drops us right in the middle of 8 Girl, basically demanding an explanation because something Cahell posted gave her like an existential headache.
She's just throwing out laughing emojis, saying she doesn't understand anything.
Yeah. And Cahill's response is to casually invite her into this massive thought experiment that effectively rewires the entire concept of human morality.
He says, imagine a single human being. Let's call him Man One.
Man one, just existing entirely alone.
It is a brilliant adaptation of the classic state of nature argument, really, stripping the human condition down to its absolute baseline.
So Cahill insists that we have to imagine man one with no society, no language, no inherited laws.
Nothing. A blank slate. And the most crucial parameter of this isolation.
Oh, this part got me.
Right. Man one has zero concept of death.
I found myself really, really struggling to visualize that at first. Like, how can an adult human just not understand death?
It takes a second to wrap your head around, but Cahell walks her through it. Man one has never seen another human.
Okay, sure.
Even if a tree falls or, an animal stops moving in the woods around him, he has no reason to connect their state of being to his own.
Because he's a completely isolated observer.
Exactly. He assumes his current state of existence is just, infinite.
So in this vacuum of knowledge, right, with no gods and no laws to tell him what is good or bad, what is the very first sensation that forces a moral judgment?
It's the biological depletion of energy.
Hunger.
Hunger.
And not just like, oh, I could go for a snack right now. We are talking about deep cellular starvation.
Right. Man 1 feels an ache in his stomach. The ache intensifies. It becomes this paralyzing, agonizing pain that physically weakens his limbs.
He finds that he can no longer run.
He can no longer climb. He can no longer impose his will on his environment. His agency is just evaporating.
And from this purely subjective biological terror, Cahill extracts the foundational axiom of hungerism.
Which is huge. The first moral realization isn't about, avoiding sin or anything abstract.
No, it is simply that a decrease of something necessary for the ability to act is the definition of bad.
That reframing is just massive.
It really is. And A Girl actually pushes him on this in the chat. She asks why it has to be labeled bad instead of just painful.
Which is a fair question. Because we usually reserve words like bad or evil for intentional harm caused by someone else.
Right, like if someone punches you, that's bad. If you trip, it's just painful. But Cahill is stripping all that moral weight away from intention and pinning it directly to biology.
It is bad because it restricts freedom of movement. It is bad because it traps the mind inside a failing biological machine.
It roots ethics in an irrefutable physical reality.
Before you can even debate high-level concepts like justice or liberty, you have to acknowledge the vulnerability of the flesh.
Yeah, if a condition reduces your capacity to act, the body registers it as a negative sanction.
But, and this is key, Cahill's framework requires a second phase. Because man 1 only understands the pain of hunger. He still believes he will just be in pain forever.
He doesn't know the pain eventually leads to non-existence.
Right. To discover that, he needs a mirror.
Enter Man 2.
Yes.
This part, it seriously reads like the opening sequence of some brutal sci-fi film. Man 1 is wandering through his environment, and he encounters another being exactly like him.
Man 2.
Right. They don't speak, they don't form a complex society, but there's this rudimentary recognition. You are like me.
But the twist is, Man 2 is already in the late stages of starvation.
So Man 1 just watches him writhe in agony. Maybe even feels a faint flicker of empathy because, he remembers his own hunger pangs.
And then Man 2 simply stops moving.
And this is where we have to pause and look really closely at the phenomenology of Man 1. Because when Man 2 collapses, Man 1 doesn't look at him and think, oh, he has passed away.
No, how could he? He doesn't have that concept.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Man 1 has experienced sleep. He knows that his own body periodically shuts down, lies still for hours, and then wakes up to resume acting.
Therefore, the only logical conclusion Man 1 can draw is that Man 2 has entered a very deep, prolonged sleep.
Cahill suggests early human consciousness might have categorized this as an eternal sleep, just an open-ended state of rest.
So Man 1 just leaves him there.
Yeah. His own hunger is pressing, so he wanders off to forage, assuming Man 2 will wake up eventually and, maybe they'll cross paths again.
The chat log estimates he's gone for a significant amount of time, right? Like weeks, maybe months, tracking seasonal resources.
But eventually, Man 1 circles back to the exact spot where he left his sleeping companion.
And this is the moment the universe just breaks open for him.
Because Man 2 isn't sleeping. Man 2 is gone. All that's left is a scattering of bleached bones.
The psychological violence of that moment is just profound.
I genuinely got chills when I read it.
The realization Cahill is driving at here is that death is not an individual discovery. It is a fundamentally collective concept.
You cannot understand your own mortality in a vacuum.
No. Man 1 only understands that he can cease to exist because he witnesses the permanent, irreversible obliteration of Man 2.
The other is required to conceptualize the end of the self.
And once Man 1 connects extreme hunger to those bones, the entire physics engine of his reality changes.
Hunger is no longer just a temporary pain that limits his actions.
Hunger is the countdown to erasure.
Wow. Death becomes the ultimate bad because it is the permanent cessation of the ability to act.
Precisely. And this is where Cahill pivots from this primal thought experiment to modern societal structures.
Right, because obviously most of us aren't wandering through a literal forest terrified of turning into a pile of bones.
We aren't. But if the foundational bad is anything that restricts our ability to sustain ourselves and avoid death, then every complex moral code we have today is just an elaborate derivation of that original biological fear.
I was really waiting for that bridge. How does Cahill apply this caveman logic to a society with grocery stores, high-speed internet, and stock markets?
He argues that the mechanisms of hunger have simply evolved.
Okay, so the landscape is more complicated, but the biological baseline remains identical.
Yes. He points to systemic issues like wage theft, class discrimination, gender inequality.
In traditional ethical frameworks, we might call those things bad because they violate human rights or abstract principles of fairness.
But Cahill argues they are bad because they are modern mechanisms of starvation.
8 Girl actually challenges him on this in the chat, which I loved. She uses a super mundane example. She says, what if someone steals my cell phone? How does that relate to caveman hunger?
And Cahill's answer is fascinating.
It is. He says a cell phone in the modern world is not a luxury. It is a critical tool for navigating the resource environment.
You need it to coordinate work, to access banking, to maintain the social connections that keep you employed and housed.
So stealing it causes a massive increase in inconvenience, which directly threatens your ability to act and acquire the resources you need to survive.
It is a radical materialist perspective.
It really is.
If you systematically underpay a group of people or redline their neighborhoods, you are artificially restricting their access to the environment.
You are inducing the pain of hunger.
Even if it's a slow, generational hunger. Cahill is suggesting that all social justice fundamentally boils down to preventing the artificial imposition of starvation on the vulnerable.
Because we all share the identical biological destiny of death. Therefore, any system that accelerates that destiny for one group over another is inherently immoral.
It's an incredibly tight, logical loop.
It treats humans like characters spawning into a survival game with a constantly depleting health bar. And morality is just the set of rules we invent to keep everyone's health bar from dropping to zero.
That's a great way to put it.
But I have to throw a wrench into this. As elegant as hungerism is, doesn't it feel a bit, I don't know, claustrophobic?
How so?
Well, it reduces every human ambition, every piece of art, every complex emotional trauma to just a desperate scramble for calories.
I see what you mean.
I mean, what happens when a society actually solves the calorie problem? If our entire morality is based on the fear of starvation and death, what happens to our ethical compass if technology allows us to conquer both?
That is the exact breaking point of hungerism. Yeah, it isolates the biological baseline perfectly, but it fails to account for transcendence. It assumes we will always be trapped by our fragility.
But the primary drive of modern human innovation is to escape that fragility.
And that brings us directly into the crosshairs of the second framework, which interrogates the very scenario you just described.
Right, the transition from the biological to the technological. This brings us to Angelo James Camilio's essay.
Transcendentally humanist posthumanism.
Try saying that 5 times fast. And the atmosphere of this text is entirely different.
Yeah.
We're leaving the casual chat logs behind and entering a highly rigorous, almost theological critique of modern tech culture.
Camilio is aiming at a very specific target here. He is responding to the prevailing ideology of Silicon Valley, often summarized by the concept of homo deus.
The idea that humans are using technology to effectively become gods.
Yes. The utopian promise that we can optimize our way out of the human condition.
Right, we want to cure all diseases, reverse aging, merge our brains with artificial intelligence, and basically upload our consciousness to the cloud so we never have to worry about Cahill's hunger or bones ever again.
Camilio looks at this trajectory, this desire to shed the messy, vulnerable, dying body and become pure, immortal data, and he diagnoses it as a profound moral failure.
His thesis is right there in the title, really.
Exactly. We shouldn't be seeking to escape our humanity through technology. We should be using technology to push deeper into our humanity.
I love the way he frames that. He essentially says that a society that achieves godlike technological power without simultaneously achieving godlike emotional and ethical maturity isn't a utopia.
No, it's a heavily armed nursery.
A heavily armed nursery. That's a
Oh, yeah.
terrifying image.
Right.
And to explain how we avoid this fate, he introduces 2 heavy concepts that we really need to break down: phronesis and potentia.
Let's start with phronesis. It's a term pulled from Aristotelian philosophy, typically translated as practical wisdom.
Okay. Practical wisdom.
Now, it's vital to distinguish this from the kind of intelligence an AI possesses. AI is incredibly good at calculation, pattern recognition, and optimizing for a specific outcome.
That is raw computational power.
Right. Phronesis, on the other hand, is the capacity to act rightly in situations that are ambiguous, messy, and fundamentally unoptimizable.
Give me an example of that distinction, because I think it's easy to conflate being smart with being wise.
Sure, think of a medical algorithm designed to allocate organ transplants.
Okay.
The AI can process millions of data points, tissue match, life expectancy, distance between hospitals, and output the most statistically efficient recipient.
That's computation.
Exactly. But the human doctor, looking at that list, knowing the emotional devastation of the families involved, recognizing the historical inequities in the healthcare system that puts certain patients at a disadvantage, and having to make the agonizing final call.
That is phronesis.
Yes. It is the ethical muscle built exclusively through the experience of vulnerability and consequence.
So an immortal algorithm floating in the cloud can never possess phronesis because it has no skin in the game.
It can't feel the weight of a wrong decision.
It doesn't bleed.
Right. And that connects directly to his second concept, potentia, drawing from the philosophical tradition of Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, potential.
And this isn't potential in the way a high school guidance counselor uses the word,
Like you have so much potential if you just applied yourself.
Exactly, not that. Potentia refers to a hidden, almost divine capacity within a living thing that is actively striving to be actualized.
It is an evolutionary tension.
Camilio is arguing that the purpose of our existence isn't to bypass this tension by becoming machines. It is to use our technology to awaken this latent ethical power within ourselves.
This leads to a phrase in his essay that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. Embodied integrity.
It's a powerful concept.
Camilio flat out rejects the fantasy of uploading his brain to a server. He writes that the body isn't a limitation to be overcome. It is the very instrument of our moral reckoning.
My mind isn't some ghost haunting a meat sack. My flesh thinks it remembers trauma, it aches, it yearns.
To lose the body is to lose the context of our morality.
If we return to Cahill's hungerism for a moment, the entire basis of empathy is the shared recognition of physical pain.
Right, the hunger pangs.
If you remove the capacity for physical degradation, you remove the mechanism by which we understand the suffering of others.
So Camilio argues that we must maintain our embodied integrity even as we integrate with machines.
Which brings in Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto.
I have to admit, when I first saw the word cyborg in an ethics paper, I immediately pictured Arnold Schwarzenegger in a leather jacket.
The Terminator.
Yeah. But that is completely missing the point of the metaphor here.
It is a common misconception. In feminist theory, the cyborg is not a science fiction trope about robots taking over. The cyborg is a conceptual tool for destroying binaries.
Because we have historically categorized the world into neat oppositions. Nature versus culture, human versus machine, mind versus body.
And Haraway, and by extension Camilio, point out that these binaries are illusions.
Because we are already cyborgs.
That's the revelation.
I mean, I am looking at a screen emitting artificial light right now, wearing contact lenses that alter my biological vision, with a smartphone in my pocket that acts as an external hard drive for my memories and relationships.
You are a hybrid creature.
I am a cyborg.
We are fragmented, synthesized beings. And Camilio's argument is that the Silicon Valley dream tries to use technology to purify us.
To iron out our contradictions and make us flawless, smooth algorithms.
But the transcendently humanist, posthumanist approach says no. We must stitch our fragmented parts together.
We must take our inherited traumas, our biological frailties, and our technological prosthetics and forge them into a cohesive moral identity.
We don't hide the seams. We take responsibility for them.
This brings up what I think is the most urgent part of his essay, the discussion on desire.
Oh, absolutely.
Because right now, the primary way we interface with technology isn't through cool robotic arms. It's through algorithms that map our desires.
Yes.
I mean, think about the endless scroll. I open an app, and within seconds, it knows what I want to buy, what political outrage will keep me engaged, what aesthetic I aspire to.
It frictionlessly feeds your desires back to you.
Frictionless. That's the word. And Camilio views this frictionless gratification as an existential threat.
He calls it a poverty of soul. You see, in his framework, desire is not merely a consumer instinct. Desire is evolutionary fire.
It is the raw material of potentia.
When you feel a deep, unfulfilled yearning, that tension is the space where self-reflection and ethical growth occur.
But if an app instantly gratifies every hunger I have, I never have to sit with the discomfort of wanting.
You lose the friction required to build phronesis.
You become a perfectly optimized consumer, but a morally stunted human being.
To combat this, Camilio introduces the practice of interpretive empathy.
Instead of mindlessly feeding our desires or aggressively repressing them, we must interpret them. What does that actually look like in practice?
It means treating desire as a symptom, trying to communicate a deeper truth.
Okay, so if I find myself endlessly doom-scrolling.
Or feeling a sudden, vicious urge to destroy a stranger in an online argument?
Right. Interpretive empathy demands that I stop and interrogate the urge.
What unresolved wound is driving this compulsion? What ancestral trauma or systemic anxiety is echoing through this algorithmic behavioral loop?
You have to decode the desire with radical patience, both in yourself and in others.
Yes.
Okay, I want to try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking this perfectly.
Go for it.
The Homo Deus fantasy feels like giving a teenager with terrible impulse control the keys to an indestructible, self-driving supercar.
Oh, that's good.
They can't crash, they can go infinitely fast, but they have no idea where they're actually going or why. They were just addicted to the speed. So Camilleo's saying we need to learn how to drive. We need the practical wisdom of navigating the road, feeling the bumps, understanding the mechanics of the engine before we eliminate the risk of crashing.
That is a highly effective analogy. An immortal being devoid of interpretive empathy and practical wisdom is not a god. It is a tyrant.
It possesses infinite capacity to act, but no moral compass to guide those actions.
Exactly.
But here is where I have to push back on Camillio.
Okay, let's hear it.
I understand the critique of frictionless consumerism, but he talks about dwelling in sacred dissonance and accepting our contradictions as the site of liberation.
He does.
He essentially argues that we need tension and suffering to grow. But wait a minute. Isn't the whole point of human endeavor to alleviate suffering?
I see where you're going.
Let's go back to Cahill's starving caveman. Man 1 isn't experiencing sacred dissonance when his stomach is digesting itself. He's just dying.
Right.
If we have the technological means to permanently extinguish that kind of suffering, why does Camillio want us to sit in the fire and interpret it? It sounds almost masochistic.
It is a very fine line, and it's really the central tension of his entire philosophy.
So how does he justify it?
Camillio would likely counter that there is a vast difference between unnecessary biological starvation and the existential friction of being human.
Okay, so cure the literal starvation.
Yes, cure the starvation, but when you apply the same logic of optimization to the human soul.
When you try to invent a fire extinguisher for grief, for longing, for the messy ambiguity of human relationships,
You extinguish the light along with the pain.
you're saying we need the friction to know we are alive.
He is saying that liberation cannot be achieved by erasing the conditions of our existence. You must transform through the contradiction.
If you remove all discomfort, you remove the necessity for ethical maturity.
And this realization that tension is necessary, but that systems can become corrupted by it, forces us to zoom out.
Because Camillio isn't just worried about individual souls.
No, he's worried about the entire architecture of society.
Which perfectly bridges us to the final and frankly the most explosive part of this deep dive. Part 3, the morality of the meshwork.
This centers on Camillio's other piece, rhizomatic ethics.
Right. We've built up from the isolated biological unit of hungerism to the technologically integrated individual of posthumanism. Now we have to figure out what happens when millions of these cyborgian, desiring, vulnerable individuals collide to form a civilization.
And to map this collision, Camillio borrows heavily from the French philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari.
Specifically their concept of the rhizome.
Yes.
This is a massive paradigm shift because most of us, consciously or not, map reality like a tree.
We call it an arborescent structure.
There's a solid, singular trunk at the center. Maybe that trunk is a divine creator, a monarch, or like a foundational constitution.
And from that trunk, massive branches of law extend outward, breaking into smaller and smaller twigs of local ordinances and personal ethics.
It is hierarchical, rigid, and top-down.
The rhizome is the exact opposite.
Think of a ginger root, a network of fungal mycelium, or a colony of crabgrass.
It spreads horizontally just beneath the soil. It has no centralized trunk, no singular origin point, and no hierarchical branches.
It is a chaotic, non-linear meshwork of interconnected nodes. Any point on a rhizome can connect to any other point.
Camillio maps society as a rhizome.
He argues that morality isn't a set of rules handed down from the canopy. It is the energy generated horizontally between the nodes.
The value of a person or an institution isn't intrinsic just because they exist. Their value is emergent.
It is defined by how they impact the relational field around them. Do they foster connection? Do they generate trust? Do they allow the network to thrive?
It is a purely relational ethic. The vulnerability of a rhizome is that a rot in one node can spread rapidly through the horizontal connections.
And this is where Camillio introduces the concept of sociosymptopathology.
A pathology of the social system. What happens when a root goes bad?
Exactly. Camilio asks us to examine how no's become pathogenic.
He doesn't believe in innate cartoonish evil. Instead, he points to structural infection, detailing two specific mechanisms.
Deterritorialization and reterritorialization.
Those are dense terms, so let's walk through them step by step with a hypothetical example.
Okay, let's say we have a node in the network, a person who moderates a community forum.
Their ethical function in the rhizome is to foster dialogue and protect vulnerable users.
So what is deterritorialization in this context?
Deterritorialization is the process of dislodging a node from its ethical relational context. It is a severing of transsubjective embeddedness.
So in the example, perhaps the forum is bought by a massive corporation.
And the moderator is suddenly subjected to impossible algorithmic quotas. They are told to evaluate thousands of posts an hour based strictly on keyword flags rather than context.
So the human being is stripped of their phronesis, their practical wisdom.
They are deterritorialized from being a community caretaker and reduced to a mere fleshy extension of the algorithm.
Precisely. The node has lost its original ethical function. It is now floating, untethered, and anxious.
This creates a vacuum, which leads instantly to the second mechanism, reterritorialization.
The broader corrupted system captures this wandering force and recodes it for destructive purposes.
Continuing the analogy, the moderator, now exhausted and dehumanized by the quotas, stops seeing the users as people.
They become reterritorialized into a tyrant.
They start banning users arbitrarily just to hit metrics, or they begin enforcing draconian rules because the exercise of petty power is the only agency the system allows them to have.
They have become a pathogenic node.
Now scale that up from a forum moderator to global institutions.
A citizen who is economically starved and socially isolated, deterritorialized, becomes vulnerable to being reterritorialized by an extremist political ideology that offers them a false sense of power through hatred.
Or a technological platform designed to connect friends is deterritorialized by profit motives and reterritorialized into an engine for mass surveillance and behavioral manipulation.
I want to insert a crucial disclaimer here for you listening. Camilio's text explicitly uses historical fascist movements and modern genocidal politicians as examples of this mass reterritorialization.
Yes, he does.
However, our goal today is to dissect the philosophical architecture he is building. We are examining the structural mechanics of how the rhizome decays, regardless of specific political affiliations.
We are looking at the engine of ideology itself.
That is the necessary lens for this level of theory. We're not taking sides, just looking at the machinery.
In Camilio's topology, when a subject undergoes this profound, destructive reterritorialization, they transform into what he terms a symptom body.
They are no longer operating as a dynamic, relational human being.
They have calcified into a conduit for structural violence. They are a tumor in the meshwork.
A tumor. That word carries a lethal gravity.
It really does.
And it brings us to the absolute edge of this philosophical map. Because if you have identified a tumor in the network, a node that exists only to replicate trauma and devour the capacity for care around it, what does a relational ethic demand you do?
This is where Camilio introduces the killable symptom and the concept of ethical violence.
It is without question the most harrowing conceptual leap in the canon.
Camilio argues that if the ultimate moral imperative is to preserve the health of the relational network, then there are tragic thresholds where severing a node is required.
He calls it rhizomatic pruning.
It's an academic justification for lethal intervention.
To go back to the biological metaphors, it makes a cold, brutal sense. If a surgeon finds a gangrenous limb, they amputate it so the patient doesn't die.
If a forest network detects a violently diseased tree, the fungal network will actively cut off nutrients to that node to save the grove.
The preservation of life requires the destruction of life.
Yes, but mapping biological pruning onto human beings is incredibly fraught.
Fraught is an understatement. This is where I had to throw up massive red flags. I read this section, and my alarm bells were just deafening.
I don't blame you.
Isn't this the exact same rhetorical playbook used by every totalitarian dictator in history? The very fascist ideologies Camilio is warning against, how do they justify their atrocities?
By pointing at a marginalized group and calling them a disease, a tumor, or a symptom that must be eradicated for the health of the state.
Exactly. By labeling a human being as a killable symptom, isn't Camilio just handing a blank check to exterminationist logic? He's basically saying violence is fine, as long as you're the one deciding who the tumor is.
It is the ultimate paradox of his framework, and to his credit, Camilio doesn't flinch from it.
How could he not?
He recognizes that naming someone a symptom borders on the exact dehumanization he is fighting against. He acknowledges that the line between rhizomatic pruning and fascist extermination is razor thin.
So how does he stop his philosophy from becoming a weapon?
He surrounds the concept of the killable symptom with agonizing, almost unbearable psychological safeguards.
But what kind of safeguard can possibly hold that kind of power in check? Because a philosophical promise of, like, trust me, I'm pruning ethically, means absolutely nothing when applied to the real world.
The safeguard relies entirely on the successful integration of Part 2. The safeguard is embodied integrity.
How does that apply here?
Camilio states unequivocally that ethical violence can never, ever be institutionalized. The moment a state apparatus sanitizes violence, turns it into a bureaucratic norm, or claims a universal right to kill, it has become the tumor.
It is fascism.
Rhizomatic pruning is strictly a situated ethics. It is a tragic, localized necessity that requires a devastating level of self-interrogation.
He demands that before you even contemplate the idea of the symptom, you must turn the knife inward. He writes, I must look first to my own complicity. Where have I made peace with systems that devour others?
You have to map the rhizome and recognize your own connection to the rot.
Precisely. You are not standing outside the system operating on a foreign body. You are tangled in the same roots.
If you exercise violence from a position of absolute certainty, if you believe in your own purity and the absolute evil of your target, you have failed.
You are acting from arborescent power, from top-down authority.
But if you prune from a position of deep entanglement, if you recognize that the person you are stopping is a tragedy generated by the very network you belong to, and you remain forever haunted by the act of severing them.
That is what makes it ethical.
Yeah.
There's this one quote that is going to be burned into my brain for a long time. I do not kill from power. I kill from entanglement, and I remain haunted.
It is the rejection of absolution. Camilio is arguing that true moral action sometimes requires us to dirty our hands in the most profound way possible and then demands that we never forgive ourselves for it.
You bear the weight of the rupture.
It is the ultimate expression of the sacred dissonance we discussed earlier. You must commit an act that violates life in order to preserve the network of life, and you must hold both the necessity and the horror of that act in your mind simultaneously.
I need to take a physical breath after that. The sheer weight of that ethical burden is suffocating.
It refuses any comfort.
Let's try to pull back and look at the massive landscape we've just traversed. I want to synthesize these three distinct sources and try to articulate the overarching narrative of Canon 1. How do all these pieces actually lock together?
If we lay them out sequentially, they form a comprehensive spectrum of human ethical development, moving from the microscopic to the macroscopic.
Okay, lay it out for us.
At the base layer, we have Cahill's hungerism. This establishes the incontrovertible physical reality of our existence.
We are biological creatures bound by fragility, the agonizing limits of hunger, and the inevitability of death.
Any ethical system that ignores this baseline reality is fundamentally detached from truth.
Hungerism proves we are fragile and finite. But then, as we evolve and attempt to conquer that fragility, we hit the middle layer.
Camilio's transcendentally humanist posthumanism.
This addresses the psychological and technological complications of our evolution.
It warns us not to use technology to simply run away from our physical vulnerability. Instead, we must use phronesis, that hard-won practical wisdom, to interpret our deep desires.
And integrate our fragmented cyborg selves into something morally resilient.
And finally, at the macro scale, we reach rhizomatic ethics.
This takes our fragile biology, our technologically entangled psychologies, and maps how we interact en masse.
It reveals that because we are bound together in this vast, horizontal, unpredictable network, we hold terrifying responsibility for the health of the system.
We must cultivate connections, interpret the trauma of the nodes around us, and when faced with absolute systemic rot, bear the agonizing burden of pruning the network.
The ultimate takeaway for me is the incredibly difficult role of contradiction. It is the paradox that holds the entire canon together.
Think about the tension here. Hungerism tells us that the ultimate bad is anything that decreases your ability to act. Therefore, the preservation of biological life is paramount.
But rhizomatic ethics tells us that sometimes, at the extreme limits of systemic failure, you absolutely must destroy a node. You must end a life to preserve the network's overall ability to survive.
Those two imperatives are in direct, hostile opposition to each other. They cannot be neatly reconciled.
And what gives us the capacity to hold those two warring truths in our head without going insane or becoming tyrants?
It's the middle piece.
Exactly. It is the philosophical muscle of posthumanism. It is the practice of embodied integrity and interpretive empathy.
It is the willingness to sit in the fire to accept that we are not pure, that our systems are infected, and that we must act anyway, guided by immense grief and hard-earned wisdom.
Canon 1 is, above all else, a total rejection of moral innocence.
It shatters the illusion that ethics is a pristine set of abstract rules we can simply obey to guarantee our goodness.
True ethics doesn't happen in a sterile vacuum. It happens in the mud.
It happens in frantic text messages about survival, in the seductive glare of algorithmic feeds, and in the agonizing, haunting choices we must make to protect the rhizome.
What a monumental journey this has been.
We started with two people texting about a starving caveman turning into a pile of bones, trying to figure out why stealing a cell phone is wrong.
We waded through the dense academic waters of cyborg feminism and the refusal to let apps dictate the shape of our souls.
And we ended up staring into the absolute abyss of sociosymptopathology and the haunting logic of ethical pruning.
It is a profound reminder that philosophy is not a dead archival subject meant only for universities. It is the active bleeding code by which we navigate our daily survival.
I want to make sure we ground all of this heavy metaphysical theory right back into the reality of the listener, because the primary lesson here is that morality is not a passive inheritance.
You cannot just coast on the rules your parents or your government gave you.
No, it is a chaotic, painful, and fiercely beautiful process of constant self-examination. You are a node in the rhizome.
Every action you take, every text you send, every purchase you make, and every ounce of empathy you extend or withhold is actively generating the ethical reality of the field around you.
You are fundamentally responsible for the architecture of your own becoming, and by extension, the becoming of the network.
As we wrap up this deep dive, the host and I want to leave you with one final practical thought to carry with you today.
It brings us back to Camilio's warning about how our desires are currently being hijacked by the digital spaces we inhabit.
Consider the invisible architecture of the platforms you interact with every single day.
The next time you find yourself deep in an endless scroll and you feel a sudden, intense spike of urgency, whether it is an overwhelming urge to buy a product you didn't even know existed 5 minutes ago, or a visceral, angry impulse to jump into a vicious debate with a complete stranger, or even the sudden, rigid adoption of a new political stance, I want you to physically stop.
Take your hand off the mouse.
Put the phone down, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, is this my own organic hunger speaking? Is this a genuine desire stemming from my own embodied integrity?
Or am I just a symptom?
Am I being re-territorialized by a machine? Have I allowed an algorithm to convince me that its synthetic roots are my own?
It might be the most vital question of modern survival. In the ecosystem of the network, are you the gardener cultivating the connections, or are you the symptom spreading the rot?
Until next time, keep digging into the roots.